Well, welcome back to a new episode of the Threshold Lab, and we're continuing our conversations with different coaches talking about the inner game of coaching. And I've been really excited about this conversation today with head women's soccer coach at UCLA, Margueritte Aozasa. And I'm really excited to just kind of unpack your journey a little bit. You're a few years into your head coaching experience at the collegiate level. But more than anything, before we jump in, Coach, I just want to take some time to thank you for showing up today and being willing to have this conversation.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy to be here and just talking all things coaching, which obviously I really enjoy. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. I think there's in just kind of the homework that I've done, the conversations that you've had about leadership and culture building, and just I think one thing that's been really cool to hear you talk about in previous conversations is how important it is to kind of like model things for your players. So I'm really excited to kind of dive into some of that. But I kind of want to zoom in here at the beginning and go back to 2022. I'd imagine that was a pretty wild year for you. There's probably a lot of emotions, a lot of words that we could use to describe that. You became the first rookie head coach to win a national championship, also the first woman of color to win a national championship in collegiate soccer. And I would just be kind of curious in that first year winning a national championship from the outside, that looks kind of like a dream start. But what were some of the things that people maybe didn't see, or some of the challenges that were maybe invisible to the public that went into not only success, but also the other side of it too?
Yeah, the biggest thing is our championship season runs from August to December, but the majority of the work gets done before that. So I started my time at UCLA the previous January, and from January to June until our players went off for summer break, we just put in so much work as a staff that looked like, obviously the stuff we were doing on the field. So first and foremost, just figuring out our strengths and weaknesses as a team, how we were going to integrate like a new system, a new style, all of those things. But then really the amount of time we took to invest in our players when you're starting from square one with a new group, I think that was the most important thing. And even when I was in the thick of it, I maybe didn't realize how much time and energy that was taking because it felt natural and it felt like it was the right thing to do. It felt very worth it, all those things. But now, as I reflect back, I think about like the long days and the conversations and the all the little wrinkles along the way that we took the time to iron out. Um, and I know from the outside looking in, like it looks like immediate success, and in some ways it was for sure. Um, but it came through like hours and hours and hours of conversation and intentional action from our staff and from our players.
What you're kind of hinting at, I think, is just the amount of details that go into building kind of a culture around a program, in installing a new system, installing kind of a your own kind of coaching framework and philosophy and everything in between. And I'm just kind of curious, like this is, you mentioned starting in January and then that championship run going through the fall over the course of that, those 6, 12 months or whatever that time span ultimately ended up being, what were some of the ways, or was there a moment where at the afterwards you thought like, ah, wow, I've evolved as a coach, or I'm not the same coach as I was when I first took this job?
I mean, even in that first year, I thought that many times over because I was doing everything for the first time. That first year for me was a huge, just as I mentioned before, it was a diagnostic for the team, but it was also a diagnostic for myself because I just hadn't ever been a head coach before. So every scenario I faced was me facing it for the first time and getting a sense of kind of who I was. I think that has continued to evolve. We just finished our third season here as a staff. And I've felt a lot of change, I guess you could say, internally. I don't know if there was a really like pivotal moment necessarily, but I know I've matured. I know I've I've gotten a lot more clarity in terms of what's really important to me, what are things that I'm more flexible on, um, and kind of one theme is like just what has stayed consistent year to year at least in theme and concept, even if it looks a little different because of the group we have. Um, I've learned kind of what the consistent themes are that our staff really resonates with, and that we try to pass on to our team like year after year. But yeah, it's been a wild time, I will say, and I have definitely changed. I think that first year I was just so kind of like enamored with everything, and just like that first year of coaching for me was just pure instinct. Like, not a lot of experience, of course, just pure instinct. And it turned out well. And then from there, though, I was able to kind of glean, okay, what did we do that really I want to stick with? What were things that were maybe just specific to that year that require adaptation? But it has been a lot, and I think um, coaches can do themselves a disservice if they get too stuck in their ways.
So there's a lot of directions we could go with that. What I heard you kind of describe is that over the last few years, you've noticed like there's certainly some continuity with standards and values that are important for you and the rest of the coaches within the program, and yet there's also flexibility and adaptability like in the methods too, and how certain things are implemented. And it makes a lot of sense that at the beginning, like you just kind of going off of instinct. I'd imagine a lot of those decisions, there were other people that kind of hopefully, or I'd imagine that you leaned on in different ways. But what have been, if we were to kind of dive in further, what have some of the things that stuck over the last few years? Like what are some of those core values or standards that you've maintained? And what might be one or two examples of things that have evolved where they have flexed in different ways since you started?
I think, and I always kind of talk in reference to our approach to coaching, because what we do on field and stuff, that content is always going to change. But in terms of our approach to how we manage the team, one thing that has stayed true from day one is how much our staff values transparency and values honesty. And I will say, sitting in my seat, like that becomes really hard. And a lot of the conversations I have with myself, a lot of like the dilemma, if you will, is like pumping myself up sometimes to have the honest conversation because it's uncomfortable. And it's often me delivering hard news or like a harsh, not a harsh, but a reality to a player or staff member, um, that can feel awkward or can feel difficult. Um, that's what for me is a struggle, kind of a daily struggle. That is part of my job. But our staff, I think, really values that transparency. And because we feel like transparency gives an ability for trust to form. And if you're not being transparent with your players, then you can't expect them to trust you. And I think they can always sense when you're holding back or when you're not being fully honest. So we really try to pride ourselves on that. Another thing that has stayed true to us, even though it does sometimes look different, is a true passion and enjoyment, not of course for the sport of soccer, but also for coaching itself. And that last year was particularly hard for us as a staff because our team faced a lot of injury, and it kind of felt like, they say like the hits just kept on coming, and we're like, I just want a breath. Um, but we'd remind each other constantly, like we are so fortunate to do what we do, right? And we have not just a passion for the sport, but we have a true passion for coaching itself, and we get a lot of enjoyment out of that. So I think those two things are probably the biggest things. Um, and within that, a passion for development, I would say too, kind of lumping that in with the coaching. And then things that have changed, it's just like I'm actually not really sure. The things that have changed are more so, like you said, adapting those messages to the group that we have, adapting those messages to the group or the circumstance that the group is experiencing, and having a flexibility in that. But when you look at things like methodology, the sessions we run, the leadership trainings we do, like all of those kind of daily interactions, although their theme may be the same, how it looks changes often year to year because we try to tailor it as much as we can to the group. I think that's one of the things really unique to collegiate sports is the turnover on your team is significant. Not even now every year, but it feels like every 6 months.
Mm.
Um, and so we have to be really conscious of that, that what worked for a group a year ago may not work for the group we have now because it's completely different people. Or even if it's the same people or two-thirds of the group is the same, the difference between someone as a freshman to them as a junior, like they are in some ways a different person. So even when there's continuity in regard to personnel, often they've changed so much that now we have to tailor what we're doing to, in some sense, a different group.
It makes a ton of sense that the dynamic nature now, personnel wise, in being a head coach at the collegiate level, how important it is to have like the continuity and those other things that you talked about, right? Like I think you can we could probably survey most, if not all, coaches, and they'd come on here and they'd talk about the importance of trust, right? I love the fact that you talk about the importance of transparency and using that as a bridge to building that trust with your players. And you mentioned sometimes that internal conversation that you have with yourself in preparation for those conversations. You know, you can call them a hard conversation, you can call them a crucial conversation. Either way, like I think it can be really a gift that coaches, it might be one of the only times a player may totally hear the truth, and you might be what the delivery medium for that. So for you, what are some of those things that you tell yourself in preparation for those conversations?
Um, one of my one of my friends in the industry told me this once, and it has stuck with me. It was before a hard conversation I had to have. She said, "You know what, Marguerite? Sometimes you just got to get your like put your big girl pants on and do what's best for the program." And that's what I kind of tell myself. Like, you know what? At the end of the day, like it is my responsibility to be transparent with them, even if it is hard to hear at first. It's either in their best interest or the team's best interest, and often it's in both the best interest of the team and individual. So I'm like, you know what? This is what you signed up for. Time to put your big girl pants on and do what's best for the program. Um, but I also just remind myself that part of my job is as a head coach, and even sometimes when I have my staff and there's a hard conversation that needs to be had, my staff, they're wonderful, and sometimes they'll say like, okay, I'll say it, and I'm like, yeah, that's great. And there's been times where they have done that and stepped up for me, but I remind them too, like, yeah, I appreciate that, but it's not your job. Like, it's my job as a head coach to have the hard conversation. And it, it's kind of undeniable. Like, it just means more coming from me. And so
Hmm.
sometimes as a head coach, that's part of that's part of the job description, and that's one of the maybe the harder parts of our job, but it's kind of what you sign up for, and I have the privilege of bearing that responsibility.
I've heard you share in a previous conversation, you kind of referenced it just there, like the weight of responsibility that comes with the head coach. And sometimes that comes in the form of these crucial and challenging conversations with players. I'd imagine that also comes in a lot of other forms, especially now at this level, at that level, and especially following a championship in year one. So I'm curious, like when you think about the weight of responsibility as a coach, how do you maybe carry that weight differently now than when you started?
I would say now it feels a lot heavier. Maybe it's just compounding. Like every year you get a little more responsibility, so I feel it more. Um, in the beginning, as I mentioned, it was just purely instinct, and maybe it didn't dawn on me how much responsibility I really had. My life has changed too, so in my time, like now I have a 1 year old, so uh, everything feels a little more dire. Um, I've learned through experiencing that heavier weight. I've had to learn strategies to help me kind of cope with that. Um, I, try to create some separation in my life, maybe more than I did before. I try to set more boundaries in my life, maybe more than I did before. Because what I've learned is like sometimes I just need a day, or sometimes I just need an evening where like I kind of just disconnect. Um, But I will say that is one of the hardest parts of what we do is when you lead a program, every decision you make affects somebody else. And whether that's like a student athlete where you feel like you're affecting their future because you, in your power, hold their ability to pursue a career on the field and pursue a career off the field often because it's tied to their education. And when it comes to my staff as well, like I really do feel the weight of their livelihood on my shoulders. And what I tell myself too is like, at the very least, I know I take it seriously. So um, that's what helps me kind of like accept it. Because I know, I may not make every right decision, but I'm going to try to make them consciously, and I'm going to try to make them with a lot of consideration of everybody else. Um, but there is that pressure of feeling like you have to make right decisions constantly because wrong decisions affect everyone around me.
I appreciate the honesty and acceptance that you're acknowledging that comes with that, like that weight and responsibility. And I think there's actually some other coaches that I've interviewed in this kind of first season that have shared very similar sentiments, and it's been um, a a fun, I don't know if debate is the right word, but thinking like, how do these things coexist in the world of high performance and in coaching, especially at higher levels when the pressure is really high and visibility of your responsibility is so constant and expectations and things. So you kind of started, I think, to touch on it there, but I'm curious, like more so, like what helps keep you anchored amidst those increasing expectations and that pressure that always is kind of rising since from the get-go that you started.
I have a really great circle of friends that help me, and I use them all kind of for different reasons. They're like, I have one or two friends that we never talk about soccer. Like we're just sending each other memes or whatever, like just for laughs. And I know that like when I'm feeling really stressed or when it feels like a little too much, I have those one or two friends that like I know I'm going to get a laugh. Um, they are not really in the industry. And then I have another circle of friends that are in the industry. And, I have two or three that I can go to with any problem that I'm facing. And what's amazing about them is a lot of them are at top programs too. Um, but what's nice about that is they can relate. They can really relate to the situations that I'm handling. So I often go to them either for comfort or advice, often a combination of both. And then I have my family too, that like I'm very fortunate to have a lot of security there. I have my immediate family, my siblings, my mom, my dad, that all they do is just give me support. And then I have, of course, my husband who is like he has his own stressful job. He's a coach too, but he gets it. And sometimes he looks at me and he's like, you know what? I can just tell you need a break. So I'm gonna take our daughter to the park for an hour so that you can just sit here on your phone if you need and just like completely disconnect. And I think without the support system I have around me, like I would be a puddle. It would be really hard to do what I do. And so I'm very thankful to have them. Um, and like I said, they all kind of give me support in different ways. But I really do think that if I didn't have that circle of friends and family to rely on, then I would feel really alone and likely very, very overwhelmed by what I have to do on a day-to-day basis.
As a society, we love to say that it takes a village, right, to raise kids. I can empathize. I have a 1.5 year old, so I'm not too far ahead of you in that journey. And what's interesting though, as we get older and we become adults, we don't use that as much for ourselves in a sense that it can take a village too for a coach, and just having that social support and those people in your corner, just how important that is to help keeping us grounded, help keeping us anchored amidst all the different challenges. So I can appreciate that. And maybe now if we kind of flip this on the other end, we've talked a little bit about the toll, the responsibility, the challenges, but I'd love to know more about like when you're at your best as a coach, what's happening for you internally, or what's the mindset that you try to return to the most often when you're coaching your athletes and your fellow staff?
There's two things that come to mind. The first is enjoyment, which I know I already said, but I say it a ton because it means so much to me. Like I'm at my best when I'm just like fully immersed, enjoying the players I get to work with, enjoying my staff, having fun. We've had people come to our environment, and I think sometimes they're a little surprised by the energy we have with the group, and it fluctuates. Like sometimes it's more serious, but a lot of times it's loose. Like it's fun. We're laughing. If somebody trips over the ball, most of the time we're laughing about it. Um, and so that's when I feel like I'm kind of my best self, and my the best coach I can be is when I'm really just kind of lost in the moment and having a lot of fun doing what I get to do. But on the flip side of that, I also think more so on like a game day, for instance, I'm at my best when I'm just like very calm. Um, I view my job as proactive, meaning regardless of what's happening in the game situation, whether we're down a goal, up a goal, if momentum is in our favor or not. Like my job is to observe and analyze either what's going well and how to continue that, or what vulnerabilities do we see that maybe they haven't gone wrong yet, but we're starting to see the game shift that way, and how do we mitigate that? So um, that's maybe more so when people feel kind of like in the zone or something, is when I'm like ultra focused and able to pick up on like the kind of smaller trends in a game.
Kind of with that, this is another thing that I've heard you talk a little bit about is like the importance of coaches kind of modeling different things for your players and kind of showing them the way, if you will. One of which being around like how do you manage your emotions, which you kind of touched on a little bit, like when you're at your best, this is how you might see me or what it might sound like and how I'm coaching. So uh, I would be curious to hear you maybe share a little bit more about where that belief has come from for you, but also like what's helped you kind of learn it to or improve it over the course of time.
Yeah, I do think that a coach's ability to regulate their own emotions is hugely important when it comes to leading a team. And I think, especially in my role where I coach like young adults that are kind of learning how to adult, if you will, seeing that in real time is hugely important for them, because regardless of if they go professional in soccer or if they pursue something else, like your ability to remain calm to me is directly linked to your ability to remain effective. Like very few of us perform really well when we're kind of off the handles, good or bad. So I think that like steadiness is really important. Um, I think part of that has come from just my natural tendency. Like I don't get really high, I don't get really low. Like my natural tendency is to stay pretty grounded, if you will. Um, but what's funny about me is I tend towards people with really high energy that kind of go up and down. I don't know, it keeps my life interesting, I guess. Um, but I think like I have a natural tendency to do that, and I've seen the benefits of it. Um, we have also a saying in our program like nobody walks away from their best performance and was like, man, I played so well, I was absolutely terrified, or like, man, I played so well, I was absolutely stressed. Like, right, like that's not what it feels like. And so we have to show our players an ability to like get ourselves to what is like a peak performance level. For me, that peak performance level is very calm. For others, it's I think I tend toward the lower side of that. Others, it may be a little higher, but very few people, it's really high or really, really low. Um, and then in real time, I've seen the benefits of it in our program. And I think because trust is so big in what we do, the transparency is so big in what we do, another large part of trust is um, like one, being reasonable, and then two, being predictable in that reason. So our players know like they can come to us with anything because our reaction to almost anything is going to be pretty steady. Whether it's really good, really bad, like we're always going to be okay, let's hear it out. Okay, how do we fix it? How do we support you? Like that's pretty much a response to everything. And so I've seen the benefits of that off field. And then I've seen the benefits of it on field too. I think the generation of athlete that I coach, they respond well to coaches that are calm. Um, they want so often they want answers, they want solutions. Um, I think a lot of times they feel pressure, they feel a ton of pressure already, so they don't need me screaming at them after they make a mistake. They already know what they want is how to what they want to know is how to fix the mistake, and so that's what I see my job as, and I think that lends itself towards being really calm.
I think with that, you mentioned in essence being a bit of an anchor for your team too. And I think we all know like coaches, there's not a coach we'd bring on this show and ask like, do you want consistent players? Like everybody would raise their hand. And I think if we flipped it, any player that was brought on, do you want a consistent coach? And everybody would raise their hand as well. And I think that consistency also helps promote reliability too, not just for players, but it's reciprocated and in that trust that you build. I think consistency kind of goes hand in hand with that. I'm curious, I know you mentioned that this is maybe more of a default kind of setting for you. Um, where do you feel though that that comes from, and how is it something that where did you kind of learn that? Is that kind of pulling from your playing experiences? Is it coming from somebody else that you've watched and learned from, or where does that ultimately come from for you?
I think one, it may have been born out of necessity in my own family because, like I said, I'm very comfortable around fairly chaotic people, and that's kind of my family. My younger sister, for instance, like the funniest person I know, but she's kind of all over the place, and I love her for it. And we play off each other really well. Um, I was even from a very young age, like kind of occupied the space of like the voice of reason, even in my own family. So when things were getting kind of scattered or emotional or whatever, I'd be like, you guys, let's just do this. Like, or like, mom, like if she was upset, say at my brother or something, I'd be like, mom, it's just really not that big of a deal. Like, I know he failed algebra, but he's smart. He'll be fine. Like, whatever. So I think there's that part of like my upbringing that kind of bred a steadiness in me. And then the other part, I would consider it my upbringing as well, but my upbringing on the field. It's like I was never a very quote unquote athletic player. I was never going to be able to compensate for a lot with speed or quickness or power or anything like that. My whole career was based on decision making. And so I think I learned the importance of like keeping a steady head from a very young age because otherwise I just wasn't going to be successful.
With that, learning, you talk about learning that poise, and whether it was by choice or necessity in the household. I also know that you talked about that your mom certainly had a big influence on you. She's an educator, and so you've referenced in other conversations that you do view your role, your coaching role, to be an educator who just happens to coach soccer. So I'm curious to hear you maybe talk a little bit more about what that really means to you, and maybe what's something about coaching that you think isn't taught enough or recognized enough as part of that educator role.
Yeah, I think it goes back to my kind of overall approach to coaching, which really is about teaching. And I think if you view almost any situation in with the lens of I'm I'm going this is an opportunity for learning. I'm going to help teach this player something in this scenario or help them develop, help them become a better person, player, whatever. Then very few situations are going to rattle you because you don't lose sight of what the actual goal is. Um, my mom also has a great saying, which is like you'll get a lot more out of a situation like if you tell someone how you feel rather than you show them, right? So like if I'm frustrated with you, rather than scream at you, rather than give you the cold shoulder, rather than this, if I just tell you, hey Zach, like the fact that you showed up late to practice is really frustrating for me because I'm trying to hold everyone accountable and now it makes it hard. Like that is so much more effective than yelling at you for being late, right? Um, and so I know like marriage counselors will say like if you get in a fight with your spouse, remember it's like not you versus them, it's you and them versus the problem. And I think coaching is kind of similar. Like when you're met with something that's difficult or that needs to be addressed, if you look at it through the view of an educator, you look at it through the lens of development, then it's much easier to stay calm and effective in that moment because the goal now is different than, just getting upset or whatever it is. So I think that part is really key. And that's like when I talk about being an educator, like that's what really resonates. Like I try to look at almost every situation through the lens of like this is an opportunity for me to teach them something positive, or this is an opportunity for me to help this player through something. Um, this is an opportunity for me to model how to get through this situation. And when you look at it like that, it's fairly easy to be calm and positive through things.
I love that you use that word opportunity. Before you shared it, that was the word that was kind of coming up for me and hearing how you describe, like, hey, every situation, every moment. I'd imagine in a way, in addition to going to your comment earlier about having to put on your big girl pants to have crucial conversations, but in the same vein, like there are opportunities, there are opportunities to teach, there an opportunity to inspire and so on down the line. And I think that's just it's a very empowering space to operate from, not only for you as the leader, but also in those that you're coaching and serving. So I love that.
Yeah,
When
yeah.
when you I kind of want to peel back a couple more layers here. So I know you're 3 years into being a head coach. You obviously had several years coaching prior to that at Stanford and I believe at the youth level and just a variety of different experiences leading up to that point. But I'm curious, like when you kind of strip away the results, the title, all the accomplishments that you've had and achievements, if you were to describe yourself as a coach, what would come up for you or what is important for you to share to someone else within that?
I think, yeah, I've been so fortunate to be a part of a lot of success, and that's not lost on me. I'm very thankful for that. But for me, when I boil down like who I am as a coach and what's important to me, um, I'd like to think I'm very thoughtful. So I'm not rash, like I understand that all my decisions have consequences, and so I try to measure those out as I make decisions. So I try to be very thoughtful. Um, I think try to be as compassionate as I can be, um, in that same view of like coaching the age group I coach, right? It's like adults in training. They're figuring things out too in a really pivotal moment of their lives. And so I try to we say like I try to handle with care, right? Like they're not perfect and neither am I. Um, and then I think just perspective, that's something that I really stand by, and I think something that really leads me is understanding that like I have enjoyed a ton of success. That can be fleeting. Um, it also, even as a head coach, I understand that I play a small role in that. Like I like to think I've had some part in the successes that I've enjoyed, but I also know like in the soccer, it's usually a program of 40 people that are all working towards something. So I try to keep that perspective that one, like there's so many people that make success possible. And on the flip side of that, as a head coach, I do understand the impact that I can have on somebody's life, both positive and negative. And so I try to really take that to heart too.
Within that perspective, it ties into a couple of things you shared earlier. Like I hear this sense of like there's gratitude certainly that you have for what you have, what you've achieved and the experiences that have helped ultimately shape and sculpt your kind of coaching. And I'm curious, like when you reflect a little bit back, we've talked a little bit about how you've evolved and progressed through the 3 years as a head coach at UCLA. I'm curious though, if we were to kind of trace it back even further, how has maybe, in what ways, if at all, has your leadership approach or philosophy evolved from being like an assistant now to being a head coach?
think as an assistant, like you just have so much freedom. You have so little constraint of like the parameters you're working within because at the end of the day, everything you say is a suggestion. So it can be totally outlandish, and if it doesn't fit the head coach's vision, then it just gets nixed and whatever, move on to the next thing. Um, so uh, I was actually enjoying um, a little recruiting trip earlier this week, and I met up with the other assistant that was on staff with me at Stanford for the longest time. And we were cracking up. He's a head coach now as well. We were like, man, those are the good old days. Like, just out there having a blast, like saying whatever came to mind, not really thinking of it, like just whatever felt right. And now we have so many more responsibilities. So I think that has changed. Like, um, before I, yeah, maybe was more instinctual. Now I have to be a little more tempered. Um, the other piece too is just like your relationship with the program changes when you're the assistant versus when you're the head coach. And it becomes a little more sincere. It becomes a little more serious. Like you feel that weight that we've talked about. Um, and yet, what's funny about it is I don't feel I have that much of a bigger role or more impactful role than I did as an assistant. It just looks very different. Um, and it's not like I'm investing more now that I'm the head coach. I was investing the same amount. It's just I didn't have as much responsibility, so it felt different. Um, but in terms of leadership, yeah, I think the other big difference is when you're an assistant, you have to be comfortable with a few things. One, you have to be comfortable when the head coach doesn't go with your idea, and you have to be totally okay with that. And as soon as the head coach makes up their mind, you got to get on board, and you got to get on board quickly and believably, like and genuinely, right? So that's very different. Um, the other piece to that is as an assistant, like your relationship with the team changes or when you transition to head coach. And I think the biggest part of that is, as I mentioned before, like as a head coach, your words just mean that much more. And that's something I take very seriously. That maybe as an assistant, like that didn't dawn on me quite as much.
Within that, I would be kind of curious. Like we talked, well, here, I actually, what I'd like to do is maybe kind of flip the mirror now a bit in your current role. So, having gone through that and experienced that evolution for you from an assistant to a head coach, now being in a head coaching role, how do you bring in and leverage the voices and the perspectives and the support of your assistant coaches and your staff? So how do you, what type of space do you try to create for them in just supporting you? What's that look like?
Oh, I think on the spectrum of like coaches creating space, I try to create the biggest space possible for my assistants. Um, One, because I just love them all so much, and then two, I think they make our program better. So I really look at our staff when you think of like a division of responsibilities. Um, I try to look at it as like we're all just trying to make the program as good as it can be. And so if that means like if I have to order the meals, then I have to order the meals. I don't really care, right? Um, I want my assistants to feel valued. I want them to feel impactful. I want them to feel invested in what they're doing in our program. So truly, I try to make like as much space for them to feel that as I can. I'm not a coach that needs to lead every session. I'm not a coach that needs to lead every classroom session or anything like that. Um, I try to view it as much or as much of a collaboration as I can.
And then what I'd love to do in kind of the back end of this conversation is just kind of dive a little bit more into kind of just your growth, your development, and maybe particularly more so not just what it's looked like over the course of time, but how you continue to evolve in current time. And so I think you mentioned this earlier, just with kind of being flexible, right? And kind of holding some beliefs and opinions loosely, if you will. I think that certainly can go hand in hand with growth. So as you've developed as a leader, what's something that you've maybe had to unlearn or rethink in how you coach or lead?
Yeah, when in my younger days, I will say, um, I think I was a lot harsher. Like I would sometimes let my emotion get the best of me. I might say something under my breath or say something that was more pointed than it needed to be. Um, and what's kind of sad about that is that often showed up in my youth coaching career. So the kids that I coached when I was first learning coaching and kind of developing my approach, they are now graduating college. So a lot of them just finished up playing either this previous season or the year before. And I joke with them all the time. I was like, I was a way harsher coach to you when you were 7 than I am with my college team now because I've just grown up and I've matured. Um, when I was a player in my younger days, just as a person, like I do have a competitiveness in me that maybe didn't show itself in the best way when I was a kid. Um, that I've learned to manage, and it still exists in me. Like at the end of the day, I want to win. I want to do whatever I can to do that. How I express it now is like putting that much thought and care and investment in how I lead the group and the decisions I make. Um, but sometimes it would show itself prior in, yeah, like a snarky comment here or there, or something that I was like, I just did not need to do that or say that. Um, I've also learned like when I do take a misstep, rather than in the past, I think I was so, whether it was ashamed of it or embarrassed or whatever, that then I would avoid confronting that mistake, and it would give me anxiety. Like I would get so nervous just even admitting to myself that that was a mistake. And I've learned, even probably in the last couple years, like how much more effective it is just to address it and just to say, you know what, you guys, like that's on me. I didn't do this or I didn't do that. Like it was a shortcoming on my side. Um, and that's something that has really like evolved in my coaching probably in the last couple years, is like the comfort and willingness and in some way confidence to say like, yeah, I made the wrong decision, or maybe I handled that situation poorly and now I need to go repair it. um, and when I reflect on myself as a younger coach, I definitely didn't do that.
It's such a powerful sentiment to kind of signal that vulnerability, right? For those that you lead. You mentioned earlier just the type of joy and environment that you try to create with your players and knowing that like they're not going to be perfect. And in the same vein as coaches and as staff, we won't be either. And it can, to your point, it takes a lot of courage to acknowledge that. Like I think we're often conditioned to avoid, just kind of either sweep it under the rug or just like, let's just move on. I don't want to like get stuck on that, but it can actually be very healthy and fruitful to acknowledge it and own it. So that way you not only can move forward, but your team I think it can just signal we're in this together, which is such a powerful sentiment.
Yeah. And I was doing another coaching panel or something recently, and the concept of like ego kind of came up and confidence kind of came up. And it came to me in that moment like it actually takes a lot of confidence and a lot of security in yourself to stand up in front of a group and say, I made a mistake. And it's actually a lot more quote unquote egotistical to not admit that you made a mistake or to avoid that. And there is an interesting relationship between confidence and vulnerability. And often I think people think of vulnerability like you're vulnerable, you're exposed, maybe you don't have confidence. But I'm like, it's actually, I think, quite the opposite. To open yourself up to vulnerability, like you actually have to have a pretty strong sense of self. You have to have a pretty secure sense of who you are. And I think in some ways, because my understanding of myself has grown, that has then allowed me to be more vulnerable in front of in front of my group, in front of my staff, in front of my team.
Hmm. I love that. I love the connection between ego and confidence and how that certainly applies to vulnerability, in leadership. And, kind of with this too, I'm kind of curious, like where you are at now currently. Some of this could be a product of the current landscape in coaching at the collegiate level. Maybe it's through your own experiences and things that you're trying to tackle or focus in on at UCLA. But What are some of the questions or challenges that you're still trying to address or learn about as it relates to leadership and coaching?
That was a great question that I haven't really thought about too much. Um, I guess I'm constantly asking, like, how, to me, the root of coaching is like, how do you get the most out of your players? Um, One thing, a challenge is, as I sit in this chair longer and I get older, all of a sudden the players I coach seem younger and younger and younger. And so the question I'm constantly asking myself is, how do I best relate to this new group of players? Or like I mentioned before, our team is the dynamic of our team, the identity of our team is constantly shifting. So I'm constantly asking myself and my staff, like, how do we best relate to this group? How do we get the most out of them in a productive way? Um, but I also am really curious, like with the group um, of athletes that I'm starting to coach, this quote unquote generation. Um, it's like, how do you build resilience? I think that's a huge thing. How do we model resilience? Um, how do we play with that fine balance of holding standards, holding people accountable, while also letting them fail because they need to, right? Like, and if you come down so hard on them after every failure, I think with this new group of players, what you breed is anxiety, which is what we're trying to avoid. So those are the things that most kind of spark my curiosity. Those are the things I'm really interested in learning about. As I coach this next group of players, and some of the things that I've noticed with them is even compared to when I was at Stanford. Now that's at its beginning 10 years ago, it feels like the athletes we're coaching now have a harder time getting feedback, have a harder
Mm.
time um, kind of riding through adversity. Um, they sometimes have a really like short term view of everything, you know, as opposed to having maybe a longer term perspective. So those are the things that are kind of swirling around my mind as I lay my head down these days. And I'm curious to kind of see what, at least in our program, what works and what doesn't work.
I think you're certainly not alone. I think that that challenge and the things that you're interested in continuing to explore are so relevant. I mean, we see that in our world. I also think it's felt in many other areas and different sports and things. And it's kind of, I know there's this like matrix within resilience where on like one side it's support and then on the other side it's challenge, and really like the most optimal and facilitative environments it's high in both, and like
Mm-hmm.
to your point, when it's high challenge low support creates anxiety, which as you said earlier, like when you ask a player like, hey, when you've been in flow or peak performance, I've never heard them say, oh, I was super anxious and really stressed out. Like that sentence usually never gets uttered. So it makes a lot of sense. It's like, how do we create this environment where both of those are high? And I think what's kind of cool, though, in a number of ways, is I think we've kind of touched on some of that, certainly not maybe the full list, but we've touched on some of that in this conversation, like the way in which you try to model the vulnerability and the leadership and the humility um, while also having those challenging conversations where you're delivering the truth. And we had another coach on previously, and he and I have had a lot of conversations. And one of my favorite adages that I've heard from him is when it comes to the truth, there's kind of three pieces to it. He's like, you got to be able to live it, you got to be able to tell it, and you got to be able to take it. And I think that's going to our conversation in a lot of ways. I think that's relevant for not only our players, but certainly all of us as staff and as coaches too.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I'm
Yeah.
gonna have to tune into their other episodes so I can
Yeah,
get
there,
some of
there
this.
there's some good. It's been I think that's been kind of the joy for me. And we there's a lot of similarity in different episodes. Obviously everybody's journey is different, contexts are different, but I think we're unpacking a lot of similar themes, and just it's been nice to hear some nuance and alternative perspective on these different things and kind of see like, oh, like I can use this from their arena and bring it into our world. So, and I think a lot of that too, one of the themes that's been showing up more and more, I'm kind of noticing it being a slow moving trend in the realm of coaching is kind of this notion of like who coaches you. And now that might be informally, that might be formally, it might be just through inspiration or whatever that might look like for you. But I'm kind of curious how you would answer that.
Hmm. It's funny because I think coaching so much ties back to feedback. Um, and so when you posed the question, the thing I thought of was like, who gives me the most feedback? Certainly my husband, he gave me lots of feedback on a lot of things, but a lot of feedback on how I lead the group and how I lead my staff and how um, even how my team is playing often. So I think he's a good person for me, like a good measure in my life to give me the honest feedback when needed. Like there's times I go to him and I'm, you know, not that often and very rarely publicly, like I'm kind of flying off the handles and he'll be like, I don't know why you're like so wrapped up in this. I'm like, oh, okay. Like it's kind of like a you know just a quick reality check, and that's really helpful. Um, we've tried as best we can too to create an environment in our program where our players can give us honest feedback, and they know that we take it seriously. So I think as much as we coach them, we encourage them to coach us because they understand that we both want the same thing. Like we want our program to be as successful as possible. So we often ask them almost in every individual meeting we have, or sometimes with the group, we'll say, like, is there anything we should know that's going to help us be better coaches for you? Is there anything we need
Mhm.
to know about the team that, or anything we should be addressing with the team that's going to help us be successful? Um, but us managing those lines of communication is really, really key because, like, yeah, I think the more like the more constructive feedback you can get, feedback that's coming from a good place and that's honest, um, then the better you're going to be for it. I'm trying to think if there's like other coaches that I really look up to. Of course, like the mentors in my life, I've had many. Um, Even if I don't talk to them all the time, I'm kind of measuring myself against like, okay, what input would they give me? Am I kind of living out what what would be in line with what I've learned from them along the way? Um, but yeah, probably like that close circle of friends and family that I know is always going to be honest with me. And then I would say my players and my staff, they're probably the ones giving me the most feedback and helping me learn the most.
I love that you pinpointed that to the word feedback and just how important that is. And I think we also know from a research perspective that the higher somebody gets within an organization and in kind of a primary leadership role, sometimes the less feedback that they get, and so having those people in your life, and for you to kind of pull that in from so many different sources, including those, including your players, I think says a lot about all those descriptors that you used earlier to just describe who you are as a coach and what's important to you. So I love that. And it kind of brings us, I want to be mindful of your time. So I have just kind of two final questions here, just to maybe kind of bring us to a close. And this one's a little different, but I'm I'm curious if you were to write a letter to your younger self when you were just starting to coach, how would you write that letter today, and what would you say to yourself?
Um, I think the theme would be like one, I wouldn't really change, obviously, how my life has turned out. Um, but I would remind my younger self to really like continue to invest in the enjoyment of what I do because like depending on how young we go, if it was younger than when I started coaching, but I started coaching when I was 17, 18 years old, so pretty young. Um, it's that initial enjoyment, like that kind of process of falling in love with coaching itself as opposed to just playing, that has like kept me above water this whole time. So like that's what I go back to even in the hard times. I'm like, okay, but like I can't imagine myself doing anything else. So I would tell myself like continue to foster that. Like just enjoy it. Um I think I would also tell myself like don't worry, it's all going to work out, because there was times when I was a younger coach where it just felt like the whole world was collapsing on me. And there was one or two times where whether it was an interaction, quite honestly, in the coaching club world, it was typically like with a disgruntled parent where I seriously considered not coaching. And I would just
Mm,
tell myself, like, don't worry, it's going to all work out, because I remember feeling just like so upset during those times where sometimes it would cross the line between, a parent being critical of my coaching versus a parent being critical of who I am as a person. And in the one or two moments I had of that, like I seriously considered not doing it anymore. So those would probably be the two things I would just say, like continue to invest and enjoy like the enjoyment of what you do, like foster that love as much as you can, because that's what's going to pull you through the hard times. And then kind of in a similar vein, like in the hard times you're experiencing now, like don't worry, because it's all going to work out. And whether like is the truth, whether kind of sad or not, like those hardest moments came to me when I was a much younger coach, when I didn't have the experience and security to kind of fall back on. So I'm really thankful that I decided to stick with it even in those hard times.
mm, mm. I, I love that. I love that sentiment. One of my previous episodes on this show where I've kind of shared these little bite-sized stories. One of them is um, success without joy will never be kind of true success. And I like to think that those two can go hand in hand and can coexist. And I know that's really challenging in this era of coaching. So I love hearing just how valuable that is to you and how you try to infuse that into everything in your program, but also how you remind yourself of that. And I think it kind of is a fitting lead to this last question. And you can tie this into coaching. You can tie this into anything you want it to. It's a question I ask every guest is, what's something that you're proud of that maybe you don't always get an excuse to share or to talk about?
Hmm. Um, Again, I don't have anything jumping out to me. I'm trying to think. I feel like the things I'm most proud of through opportunities like this, I get to talk about all the time. Um, but right now, I think I'm really proud of my husband and I, because the last 3 years have been really hard. Just so much change, and whether that's in our career, whether that's like moving to LA, having a daughter, all these things that we've tried to manage. And it hasn't always been easy. And I think sometimes, people don't get to see that for sure. And often people don't get to talk about that. But that is something I'm really proud of, is like we have continued to find a way to just like make sure the other person knows that, hey, like even when it's really tough, like we're going to figure things out. And at the end of the day, like I'm going to be there. So that's something I'm really proud of. And I think the addition of our daughter has really tested us in a lot of ways. She's obviously something we're really proud of too. And just, as you know, with a 1.5 year old, like as a 1 year old, her personality is starting to really show. And it's really, really fun just to see that come about. And I'm really proud of the environment we've created, both my husband and I, and also just like my close friends and family, even my team and my program, because she's around us quite a bit. Like, I'm really proud of the environment that she gets to grow up in.
Mm, I appreciate you sharing that. It ties back to it takes a village. That's maybe the an underlying theme in this whole kind of conversation, not only for ourselves as leaders, but obviously with our kids that we raise, our the players that we coach, and so on down the line. So, Coach, I just want to thank you again for taking some time out of your busy day. Again, we talked about this at the beginning. There is no off season in coaching, so I know you still have a lot of things on your plate, and just very grateful for you taking some time to open up the curtain and reflect the mirror on you and your values and just who you are as a coach. So, thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. I thought this was really meaningful.